good afternoon, everyone. We'll be
Hello. Can I just check? Can you hear me okay?
Hello, good morning, sir. Am I audible to you, sir?
I can hear you now.
Am I audible to you, sir?
Hello there. I can hear you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir. Absolutely clear.
That's great. That's great. I'll put
We'll be
myself.
beginning in a few moments, sir.
Okay, I'll put myself on mute if that's okay, and
All
then
right,
I'll
sir. All
unmute
right.
myself when you have me talking.
Yes, sir. Definitely. Thank you.
Okay. Good to see you.
Hello, yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Hello.
Hello.
Hello and welcome. Dear participants, we welcome you to the International E-Conference on Borderless Growth, Equality and Sustainable Development, the Pathway to Human Welfare. Before beginning, I'd like to remind you of the fact that this e-conference is being conducted live on two virtual platforms. And despite our best efforts, there might be some technical glitches. In case any such fault creeps in, you can rest assured that we will try to resolve them at the earliest. We just require your patience and support. There are just a few instructions for all the participants. I will go through them one by one. Kindly make sure that your Zoom username is the same as the name you entered in the registration form in order to ensure that the e-certificates are given to the registered participants only. To reduce the possibility of issues that may interrupt the e-conference, we recommend that you suspend or pause any downloads that might have been in progress on your device. Kindly do not share any slide or presentation while the meeting is on. Refrain from using annotation tools as it might disturb the speaker. Kindly mute your microphone upon entry. Participants are requested not to unmute their microphones during the session to help keep background noise at a minimum and to ensure better audio quality. Keeping the video on is optional as per your convenience, but we advise you to disable it in order to conserve data. Participants can switch on the camera if required during the question and answer session, ensuring that the camera is placed appropriately. Questions will be taken at the end of each session. Participants are requested to send in their questions using the chat box. Please restrict the use of the chat box for raising questions and queries to the speakers and for responding to queries raised by the admin. In case you leave the e-conference in between or get logged out due to any technical problem, kindly message either on our email address or on the official WhatsApp group, links to which have already been shared with you. In case you are unable to get through on Zoom, kindly join us on the YouTube link provided here. The e-conference is being live streamed on this channel. In case you join us through YouTube, we request you to kindly take a screenshot and drop in an email to us with your name and institutional affiliation mentioned in it to enable us to know that you attended the e-conference. Isabella Thoban College, Lucknow, I extend a very warm welcome to our President, Dr. Mrs. E.S. Charles, our Principal, of Geography, Dr. Mrs. A.C. Scott, our keynote speaker, Professor Danny Dorling, our plenary speakers, Emeritus Professor Dr. V.K. Srivastava, Professor R.B. Singh, Professor K.N. Singh, Dr. N.K. Rana, Dr. B.W. Pandey, Dr. Poonam Sharma, Dr. Animesh Roy, our young scholars, Mr. Joseph K. Ravi, and Mr. Rajarshi Das Gupta, esteemed faculty members, researchers, and students from different parts of the country. We are deeply appreciative that you have made a huge effort in being with us here today for this international human welfare and offer you a most grateful welcome. Encouraging, empowering, and charismatic President Dr. Mrs. S. Charles, who has truly led the college to the pinnacle of success, sends her best wishes and blessings for the International E-Conference, but due to her prior conflicting commitments, is currently unable to join us. Professor K.N. Singh and Professor R.B. Singh are also unable to join us at the moment due to unforeseen circumstances, but send their best wishes for a successful conference. No academic program at Isabella Tobin College can begin without invoking the blessings of the Almighty, who is omnipotent, omniscient,
Good.
Hello, Ma'am Moses.
Yes, I'm going to read a few portions from the Bible before we pray. The earth is the Lord's and everything in it, the world and all who live in it. The Lord laid its foundations and marked off its dimensions. Great is our Lord and mighty in power. His understanding has no limit. Let us bow down our heads and look to God in prayer. Our gracious, loving Heavenly Father, we thank you and we praise you, Lord, for a beautiful day like this, that you have given us life to live this day. This is the day, Lord, that you have made. Help us to rejoice and, Lord, use this day to the best we can. We thank you, Lord, this morning, afternoon, as we submit, Lord, this e-conference conducted by the Department of Geography into your loving hands. Father, we pray, Lord, that as they talk about different issues on equality and borderless growth and sustainable development and human welfare. And Father, as they deliberate over these topics, and as the keynote speakers and others who are going to, Lord, speak today, we pray, Lord, that we will be able to learn something new. That, Lord, what we learn today, Lord, we would be able to use it, Lord, so that our world would be a better place. We especially pray for a time like this when the whole world is facing a pandemic. Father, we pray, Lord, even at these moments, help us to have hearts that would reach out to people who need help at this time. And we pray in our little places, wherever you have kept us, keep us a blessing, Lord. Make us a blessing, Lord. And so, Lord, I commit this whole conference, we commit the organizing team of the Department of Geography into your loving hands. Pray, Lord, that as they conduct this conference and every student, every faculty, everyone, Lord, and especially the speakers, we commit all of them into your loving hands, Lord. Let these 2 days be days that we can never forget, Lord, because of what you have done and what we have learned, so that we can use it well and be a blessing. In Jesus' matchless name we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Ma'am Moses, for the wonderful invocation. I would now like to call upon upon our dynamic and inspirational principal, Dr. Mrs. V. Prakash, under whose able administration the college has steadily advanced. We invite you to offer the formal welcome address.
Am I audible? Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am, you are audible.
Yes,
So
ma'am.
on behalf of Isabella Thoburn College, I would like to extend a warm welcome to all the participants who joined this seminar, this webinar on borderless growth, equality, and sustainable development, the pathway to human welfare, organized by the Postgraduate Department of Geography, Isabella Thoburn College. I'm so happy that all of you from different institutions, both faculty, students, and researchers, have taken time and joined this seminar, because I'm sure that this will be a learning experience for each one of us. I would like to extend especially a warm welcome to our keynote speaker, Professor Danny Dorling from the University of Oxford. Sir, it is a privilege to have you in our midst today, and I'm sure that your depth of knowledge and your experience is going to help us to understand borderless growth and human welfare in the context of the present scenario. I also welcome Dr. V.K. Srivastav, Professor Emeritus, University of Kharagpur, who is our plenary speaker, and all the other plenary speakers who will be introduced to you shortly. I'm so happy that the Department of Geography has undertaken this very relevant theme for the webinar today. It is really important, borderless growth, because now we see that with globalization, with communication technology, merging into each other. It is no longer a world of borders, because whatever is happening on one side of the globe easily and affects the other part of the globe. So we are becoming more and more closer to each other, merging with each other. But in this context, it is so very important that equality be maintained, because it is always the marginalized who suffer. Wherever they may be equal, it is the marginalized who suffer. So equality and sustainable development, development that will take them further, development that will develop to make the marginalized or to include the marginalized is so very important. And all of it together will add to human welfare, which is our main concern. So I'm sure the speakers who are going to speak on this topic will enlighten us all the more, so that we will be enabled and we will be able to do something further. We will be able to go to the next level. So on this note, I welcome all the participants, all the researchers, and the keynote speaker here in our midst, and my best wishes to each one of you, particularly Department of Geography, who has worked very hard for many days under the leadership of Scott. Congratulations to all of you. Congratulations to the team. And may you have a wonderful and ennobling experience during this time.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am.
I thank you, Principal Ma'am, for bidding the participants of the e-conference a genial welcome, for your blessings, and for rightly pointing out that equity and all-inclusive sustainable development is the need of the hour. I now wish to introduce the head of the Department of Geography, Dr. Mrs. A.C. Scott. Ma'am is our guiding star and leads us in spirit through her unwavering faith, grit, and determination. Her capacity to galvanize our hunger for knowledge is unparalleled, and her persistent efforts in motivating us to compete with ourselves, aiming higher every time, bear fruits which even we are astounded to see. I request you, ma'am, to kindly introduce the theme for the International E-Conference, a theme which we know is very dear to your heart.
Thank you, Anupama. Yesterday's geographical phenomena, I hope we are victorious. Thanks to my president, ma'am, Dr. Mrs. E.S. Charles, who has always been the stimulating force behind everything. And whatever I am standing in the department is because of her only. So, ma'am, I'm really very thankful for your guidance, for your support, and for your dynamic performances. Thank you, ma'am. And the next, I would like to convey regards to my principal, ma'am, Dr. Prakash. Without her, it couldn't have been possible. So she was pursuing and she was saying, "Nahi, you have to do." So I took this conference so that we can make it and we can go forward. So thank you, ma'am, for your dynamic stimulation also. Then I convey my regards to all the eminent speakers. We have participants from UP, Uttarakhand, and besides that from Assam, West Bengal, Haryana. Continuously we are receiving the mail and everything. So I extend my regards to everybody and especially to the young geographers who have joined this. So thank you everybody for being here. The theme for this e-conference is borderless growth, equality, and sustainable development. The pathway to history, I have read many philosophers, but the thought of Anaximander had always stimulated me and had always created something in the process that I have gone through this. And now today we have materialized it as borderless growth, which is also boundless. And Anaximander taught that all things are generated from the boundless, borderless, limitless. Aristotle says boundless has no origin. What is the divine? It is that has no origin and no end. Even Plato argues for the same context. In all these arguments, the boundless seems to be associated with an inexhaustible source. There are many philosophers who say that water, fire, and air, the geographical phenomena, should not be boundless. Because if one encroaches in the other, it will be a disastrous situation. So, nevertheless, the boundless source. Further, if we venture into the origin of the cosmos, the philosophers have reached to a point that all the heavens and the worlds within them have sprung from some boundless nature. From here to the theory of the origin of the solar system of Kant Laplace, the journey speaks about a boundless God's existence, which is also mentioned in the first chapter of Bible, that is Genesis. A coherent explanation of the boundless, limitless, borderless is all mentioned in the Bible. And in one place, the boundless love of God for human being is described miraculously. And it is in a very secretive way also. Hence, this concept of boundless of Anaximander, further depicted as borderless or limitless, is beautiful as in today's scenario. Everything, if we go into educational system, economy, technology, connectivity, it has become boundless or borderless. It had been since many years when the terms globalization, liberalization, global village, global to local, and many other led to the concept of boundless and borderless. On the other hand, it seems to be very mysterious also. In bracket, I quote, many geographical concepts are still secret and mysterious. It emerges from the God Almighty, who is Alpha and Omega, and the love demonstrated by him is also interpreted as boundless. Sometimes intellectuals refer to as stray text, but if you have an angle of metaphysician, you will appreciate it, as it is said that all blessings flow from the Almighty God, who is boundless, and all revelations comes from him and to whomsoever he wants, he can bestow upon. Even Stephen Hawking, Einstein, and many other physicists also, if we name, they have all accepted the boundless, the borderless, and the limitless God. Nevertheless, further to talk about borderless growth, it is seen in today's world that every living organism, when I say living organism, I quote the state as a living organism and human being both, have a quest of limitless, borderless growth, may it be spatial, economic, trade, or any other aspect. So to which extent it is permissible? As geography says, we cannot create space on the earth. All we can do is to utilize it, what we are given, properly and with rationality. There is a correlation between the water and its uses also. Underground water, minimum percentage and maximum usage. Oceanic water, maximum percentage and minimum usage. So all this, and there are many more in geography in the universe. So all this lead us to be disciplined and to explain that there is a boundless source of everything. Borderless equality is the state of the domain of rights, status, opportunities. And sometimes it is stepped up as liberty also, but not always. Again, the question arises, to which extent this liberty? Equality is seen in dissimulated form sometimes. First known usage of equality appears to be in the 15th century. And once Martin Luther King Jr. in his speech at Civil Rights March said that I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by their color of the skin, but by the content of their character. This is just one mere example. But then there are many like this. So I cite, equality could be borderless, limitless, and boundless, but with rationality. And next comes the sustainable development. Geographically, it is the development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the needs of the future generation. And even United Nations has accepted this definition also and the concept also. But I feel every effort to reach to the desired positive concept of sustainable development is always appreciable. And here again, there is a but. Should it be borderless, limitless, boundless? Sometimes we can be asked to go to the land of Canaan, a land which is always known as a land of prosperity. There is a question mark. Even at times, what does it mean? There are many questions. This all argument could be fruitful and powerful if it could be translated into human welfare, which is the ultimate aim of every research work and conference. This human welfare could be boundless, borderless, or limitless. If we can reach out to the end of the world with this message and testimony that our every action and reaction should be aligned towards human welfare, I think it will be the best. So with this, I leave for all the speakers and participants to fill your colors of thought, concept, and your ideas to align towards the welfare of the humanity at large. So thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for bringing out the theme. Hello, yes. Thank you, ma'am, for bringing out the theme of the conference so beautifully. Indeed, ma'am, human welfare should not be restricted by boundaries. It is my proud privilege to introduce the keynote speaker.
Yes, Anupma, go ahead.
It is my proud privilege to introduce the keynote speaker for the International E-Conference, Professor Danny Dolling. Even though Sir needs no introduction, I would humbly like to say a few words about him. Professor Danny Dorling is the Halford Mackinder Professor of Geography at the School of Geography and Environment at the University of Oxford, London. Born in London, born in Oxford, and having lived all his life in England, Professor Dorling tried to counter his myopic worldview and started working with a group of researchers on a project to remap the world in 2006, and thus was born www.worldmapper.org, a website which helps us to discover the world, or rather rediscover the world as we've never seen before, through unique cartographic and geographic visualizations. He has published with many colleagues more than a dozen books on issues related to social inequalities in Britain and several hundred journal papers. Luckily for us, a lot of this work is available open access. His work concerns issues of housing, health, employment, education, and poverty. During the early part of his career, Professor Danny Dorling was employed as a play worker in children's summer play schemes. He learned the ethos of preschool education, where the underlying rationale was that playing is learning for living. He tries not to forget this. He is an academician of the Academy of Learned Societies in the Social Sciences, was honorary president of the Society of Cartographers from 2007 to 2017, and is a patron of Road Peace, the national charity for road crash victims. We welcome you and invite you, sir, to deliver the keynote address titled Geography of Slowdown, the End of the Great Acceleration, and why that is good for the planet, the economy, and our lives. Welcome, sir.
Thank you ever so much. If you can hear me, can you
Yes,
put
sir.
your thumbs up, please?
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
Brilliant, brilliant. I'm now going to try and share my screen. But before I do that, I should say thank you ever so much for this invitation and for arranging this talk in this way. In the last few months in Britain, we've learned how to do lectures like this. It's been very, very strange. But the great thing is, of course, distance hopefully doesn't matter, but we'll see how well this works. So just give me a minute to try and share my screen and we'll see where we get to. You have to enable screen sharing.
Yes, sir, just a second.
Great. Okay. Now then, can you tell me what you can see at the moment on your screens?
We can see the first slide, the second slide, and a couple of slides at the bottom.
Oh, that's good. I'll stay on that view because then you can see what's coming. I'm going to talk for about 40, maybe 45 minutes. And I'm going to talk about the geography of slowdown. I've written a book very recently called Slowdown. The subtitle is The End of the Great Acceleration and Why It's Good for the Planet, the Economy, and Our Lives. It's a result of 6 years' work looking at a series of data sets of changes over time. And what I found was that what I think is happening in the world is different to what many people think. Many people think, or at least they thought before the pandemic began, that everything was speeding up, that the world was going faster and faster and faster. And it's understandable why people thought that, but it is possible that there was a slowing down before the pandemic began. And a lot of the graphs I'm going to show you are borderless, so about trends that are worldwide. And I'll give you some guesses as to why this may be going on, but I'm far from sure myself. you can now see we go there. You can now see a traditional graph of population growth in the world. It starts about 12,000 years ago in 10,000 BCE, when the population was very low. You can see it hardly rising at all over time. But then, around about 2,000 years ago, we have a slow and steady rise, and then a sudden acceleration about 200 years ago. And we go to 1 billion people, 2 billion people, 3 billion, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, projected to be 10 fairly soon. And that is the traditional image that's given of population in the world, kind of out of control growth, out of control change, and not just population, everything else. The amount of food that we're consuming, the amount of animals that are grown on the planet for our own use, the amount of iron ore that we dig out, the amount of pollution we create, everything is not just going up, it appears to be accelerating. So what I want you to do is to step back and to think, is that actually true? Is everything really accelerating? Now you can see a dot moving. Is that okay? Yep. I think you can see a dot moving, hopefully. And that dot is moving on a special kind of graph. And this is a graph which shows you two things at the same time. One thing is the total population, which is along the y-axis here. And the other thing is the rate of change in that population, which is along the x-axis, the horizontal axis. And we're looking at an imaginary country called No Such Land. A country which had 100 million people in 1950. And that population was rising and rising in 1960, 1970, 1980 at about 2% a year. So that by 1985, it had got to 200 million people. And by around about 2005, it had got to 300 million people. And by 2020, it had got to 400 million people. And you'll see that the dots get bigger and bigger, and that the space between the dots begins to get wider. And this is acceleration. This is something that is, if you like, almost out of control. Although it looks like a straight line, you can see that very, very quickly, we're going to get to 500 million people, 1 billion people, 2 billion people, 3 billion people. I've got a quote by the side of this graph, which is a quote from Charles Darwin, who talked about how occasionally in the life of a species, and human beings are a species, there are a few favorable seasons when there is a population explosion. And that's what's happened to human beings. This graph is showing you what deceleration would look like. Again, we're going to start in 1950 with a country. Again, with around about 100 million people. And again, the population is rising by about 2% a year. But it rises by 2%, then by 1.9%, by 1.8, by 1.7, by 1.6, by 1.5, and so on. Until 1970, it's not rising at all. And then it falls by 1/10%, 2/10, 3/10, and so on. And you can see the population coming down to 80 million, coming down to 40 million by 2017, and eventually getting to 0 by 2070. So this is deceleration. The absolute population is on the y-axis. The change is on the x-axis. Let's go forward. We're going to look at real data now. That was just imaginary data. Now, the interesting thing for me is that things that we thought were accelerating, when I looked at them, turned out not to be. This particular graph is about the amount of money that university students in the United States borrow so they can go to university. And the little red dot is currently climbing to around about 2018, when it was about $1.5 trillion US dollars, 1,500 billion US dollars. An enormous amount of money being borrowed by students in the United States to go to university. But if you look carefully at the graph, you'll see that it splits into two time periods. One from 2006, when the data began, to 2009, when there is acceleration, going higher and higher all the time, peaking in autumn, normally when the students go to university. And then it changes around about 2009 after the financial crash, and it's still going up, but it's now leaning leftwards. So the rate of change is no longer more and more and more debt all the time. Let's look at something completely different from student debt. I just wanted to show you student debt because that's something we think is growing uncontrollably. And I wanted to show you that it isn't. Wikipedia. You might think of Wikipedia as a database, a collaborative database built by people when they choose to do it around the world that will be getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And it is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Along the y-axis of this graph, you can see how many million articles there are in Wikipedia. And on the x-axis, you can see the rate of change of that. Wikipedia began around about 2001. And at first it did accelerate. More and more articles being added every year, more than the year before, until 2007. And then the number of articles that were added was not as much as the articles that were added the year before. And less in 2009, less in 2010, 2011, 2012. Still rising, but rising less quickly. Little acceleration in 2015, 2016, but then it slowed down again. Why does Wikipedia slow down? Because there are only so many articles that you can actually add to Wikipedia that people really want to read. It doesn't make sense to people to want to read endless information about more and more obscure things. So that's another example of something that you might think was accelerating uncontrollably, but actually only did so for 7 years at the beginning of its existence. And you can find the same with all kinds of data in the world. It is not accelerating uncontrollably. Here is something that still is accelerating uncontrollably. It's the emissions of CO2 in the planet. The planet is absolutely borderless if we think about carbon dioxide. And so by 1998, we were emitting 25 billion tons of CO2 a year. By 2008, it was 30. By 2015, it was 35 billion. And you'll see it's accelerating again, 2018, not just going up, but going up faster than before, moving this way. It has to get over that line before it actually decelerates, which it only did in a recession in the 1980s, recession in the 1990s, hardly at all at the end of the 90s. And the Great Recession in 2008, I'm afraid, didn't take it over the line. Those are emissions of carbon rising and rising and rising. So there are a few things. Carbon is the first, which is rising. Now, if you're wondering why I'm using this kind of a graph, it's because it shows you the detail. In this case, it shows you, for instance, when we have a summit at Rio, or another summit at Kyoto, or another summit at Paris, we tend to actually get accelerating emissions after the summits because we think we've done something about carbon emissions and then we become a little bit lazy, perhaps. Or it's when economic growth in the world was highest. I'm going to show you now what this looks like on a normal graph. Now, you may say a normal graph is very easy to understand, and you'd be correct. Here's carbon emissions going up and up and up. But what the graphs that I've been drawing, they're called phase space diagrams, highlight, are when things go faster, for instance here, and when they go slower, for instance here. And it brings out the detail of that kind of change over time. Why do carbon dioxide emissions matter? They matter because they are the primary reason for temperature rises on the planet. Now, the temperature record is complicated. The carbon dioxide graph is relatively simple, particularly when it's drawn in a conventional way, but here's temperature. And this is compared to the 1951 to 1980 normal. So around about 1950 to 81, it's around 0. And you'll see that after the Second World War ends, we haven't quite got there. Oh, we have. It begins to rise and rise and rise and rise, and particularly rises quickly out of recessions. So by 2018, we are almost at 1 degree above that 1950 to 1980 normal. And the graph is sloping that way. It's sloping to the right. So global temperature is not just rising, it's rising faster on average each year than the year before. So CO2 and global temperature, they're the only two things I've shown you so far which are accelerating. I'm going to show you a whole series now of graphs about population. I'm going to do it quite quickly because I have far too many graphs, but it's something we can be fairly sure about. And population matters because it's the kind of denominator for everything else. If our population were accelerating uncontrollably, then there really wouldn't be much hope for reducing carbon emissions or much hope for future temperature. But it isn't. The graph, the conventional graph I showed you at the very start, is misleading. Here's the world population graph, but now shown in a way which allows you to see that yes, we had acceleration in the past. We particularly had fast acceleration after 1850, when it zooms like this, and even faster after 1940. But by the 1960s, something was changing. So that it began to increase more slowly, and then the increase was the same all the way from the 80s through to now. There's a projected slowdown in population such that it may get to 11 billion shortly around 2100, but it may not. These are the estimates that the UN produced in 2017. When the United Nations updated them in 2019, then they did not look to be quite as dramatic as this. But that's an incredible slowdown. I'm going to put it on a different scale now for you. This is a log scale to show you we've had slowdowns before. The first slowdown was after 1492. And you can see it there, a century from 1500 to 1600. And that slowdown was due to people arriving in the Americas with diseases and many millions of people dying in the Americas after Christopher Columbus and the other invaders arrived. Second slowdown occurs after 1820. And this is most closely associated with colonialism and the British invading many, many countries around the world. Initially reducing the rate of population growth, but then helping cause exponential growth, very fast growth, 1850 through to 1960s, and then the current slowdown. The current slowdown is different from these other slowdowns. This is the invasion of the Americas. This is the colonialism of the British and other European powers. This is people choosing to have fewer children. So it's a very, very different pattern to before. Let's look at some individual places, individual countries. So start off with the United States. The United States is a rapid population acceleration country. The little dot is now in the 1930s, 1940s, 1950s, when it was about 150 million people. You can see that acceleration in 1955 increasing by 3 million people a year. 1997, almost 4 million people a year. But since then, it's been decelerating and it's projected to carry on decelerating. But the United States is unusual. There are very few places in the world that's expected to still be growing by 2100 very much, and the United States is one of them. I must speed up because I want to end on time in around about 30 minutes or so. Here's China. And these graphs will be strange to you. You haven't seen graphs like this before, so don't worry if you find it hard to understand. But China is a good example, I think, of that initial slowdown in the 1820s, 1830s, 1840s due to colonialism. You can see it here, the Opium Wars and the British. And then an acceleration in population to 1951, a deceleration, an acceleration again, and a slowdown. Slowdown actually began before the one-child policy. And when the one-child policy was lifted, we still had a slowdown. And China is projected to get down to 1 billion people before or around about 2100. It's only 80 years away. Population in China drops to 1 billion. Those are the UN projections. It may well be faster than the UN project. Let's have a look at all the countries of Africa. The countries of Africa are interesting because they had an acceleration that went on longer. through the 1980s and 1990s and 2000s, longer than much else of the rest of the world. And that was related to policies of the World Bank and so on, particularly structural adjustment and removing the funding of schools. Because if you do not have people going to school, particularly young women going to school when they're 15, 16, 17, you'll have faster population growth. But even Africa by 2060, deceleration is predicted by the UN based on what is happening currently. And I'll show you individual countries a bit later. And population stabilizing between 4 and 5 billion people in future. Going to go forward to a tiny little place, which is the British Isles. Really remarkably unimportant nowadays. Much less than 1% of the world's adults. Far less than 0.5% of the world's children live in the British Isles. This is Britain and Ireland together. When you look at a small place, you get a lot more perturbation because of individual events. Our biggest rise in population recently was to 2008. This is people coming from Eastern Europe who we invited in. The biggest fall was the Irish famine in the 1840s, which you can see there. So that's giving you an idea about what it looks like for a relatively small set of countries. But again, set to stop rising around about 80 years from now. Population below 90 million people. Small country, or collection of small countries. Collection of big countries, the Indian subcontinent, where you are at the moment. Again, accelerated rises in the 60s and 70s have slowed down. So that by the year 2000, population was growing the fastest it would ever grow, just over 20 million a year. And by 2064, just 44 years from now, the population is set to fall to 2 billion by the year 2100. Right? This is what a slowdown looks like. This is the projection that is almost certainly going to happen, if not faster than this. Because as I say, these are the 2017 UN figures, the 2019 UN figures are for faster population reduction, and demographers around the world think the UN may well be overestimating the rate of growth. It may fall even faster than this. Smaller country, Japan, but one of the most dramatic countries for current slowdown of population. You can see the effects of the Second World War here, and the actual falls in 1945. After war, you often get a baby boom, which we did in Japan to 1948. And then an acceleration again from 1960, the children baby boom. But by 2010, 10 years ago, population was falling. And the fall to come is quite huge, from 130 billion down to 80 billion within just 80 years from now, if current trends continue. The only thing likely to stop that will be increased immigration to Japan. There is no sign of any increase in the number of children that people are having. The rest of Europe and Asia. So this is all of Europe and Asia, excluding the Indian subcontinent, excluding China, excluding Japan, and excluding the British Isles. Just to show you that it's happening everywhere. And the date in this case for the rest of Europe and Asia is 2063, by which population should start falling. You may be getting a bit tired of population by now, so I'll go faster. Oceania, just for completeness, this really is almost all Australia, and then next biggest New Zealand. You can see gold rushes early on. You can see the effects of migration, high in 1950, high in 1968. And the projection really is anybody's guess after 2008, but this is still for a reduction to come in future. All the rest of the Americas, Latin America, South America, North America, excluding the USA, which I showed you before. And as I said, the USA is unusual because the Americas are slowing down even faster than the USA. 2061 is when population should begin to reduce in the rest of the Americas, long before it does in the USA. Although if the USA does economically badly, as it is at the moment, its population may well slow down much earlier, because why would you migrate to the USA when there is so little economic opportunity in USA at the moment. What's driving this? It's babies. It's people having less and less children. You can see both these graphs are the same. One's on a scale that zooms in. Most recently, the other one goes from 1960, but you can see the average number of children that people have in the world by 1992 falling to 3. By around about 2008, falling to about 2.5. Incredibly fast fall in people having children worldwide. And we look at the USA. And in the USA, you'll see that it comes below 2 and then circles around. The USA has the highest fertility in the rich parts of the world. But even in the USA, it finds it very hard for fertility to go over 2. The majority of the reason for world population still rising is not babies, it's people living longer. As the number of children we have, as the number of babies we have reduces, we are going to have population stability in the future. China, much, much smoother curves. And again, this great reduction occurred before the one-child policy. Incredible reduction from 5 to 4 to 3 children by 1978. And then you see a loop that replicates the earlier, larger loop, because if you have huge reductions before, you get an echo of a baby boom and a baby slump later. China actually has mildly rising fertility now, but rising so slowly, between 1.6 and 1.65 children per couple. It really is not going anywhere. And with the pandemic, it actually, and the economic crash before the pandemic, which was beginning, it slowed down. Niger, one of the poorest countries in Africa, where people were having 7.6, 7.8 children per couple in 1978, heading to almost 7.9 by 1983. And then look what happens. Now it's a straight line because it's based on estimates by the World Bank, but still it is a remarkable fall since the year 2000 in the number of children that people are having in the poorest parts of Africa. That's Niger. Look at somewhere like East Timor here and the effects of invasion and war. And when you have invasion and war, you get rising fertility. East Timor went up from 4.5 children to 5 to 6 by 1994 to 7 by 2000. But since then, it has also fallen rapidly. Or somewhere like Guatemala, which had many, many civil wars, but actually managed to have falling fertility throughout that whole period. Haiti. Haiti throughout the 1960s, 1970s, 1980s was around about 6 children per woman. Incredible population growth. But then from 1986, a bit earlier than those other countries, you begin to get this incredibly fast fall, almost at 2.5 children 4 years ago, almost certainly there now. France. Didn't happen much earlier. 1970s, 1975, just over 2 children per couple. We're getting less and less of a difference between places in the world. The falls that occurred in France a long time ago occur far faster now in other parts. The UK, again for completeness, similar to France. South Korea, far faster, quite incredible. By 1983, 2 children. By around about 1999, 1.5. This graph ends in 2016, but I can tell you early this year it was reported that the average number of children in South Korea is now 0.99 per couple. Less than 1 per couple. That means a halving of population in a generation in South Korea, if you don't have migration coming in. Portugal. Again, very similar European patterns to what you've seen earlier. But more importantly, Brazil, far greater population, and look at Brazil coming down to wiggle around at 1.8, 1.9 at most, 1.7, 1.6 children since 1984. Just trying to get you an idea of how fast this has gone down. You'll be glad to know that that's the population fertility graphs finished. I'm just going to show you a few other things in the world to try to give you an idea. It's not just population which is slowed down. This is GDP, conventional way of looking at GDP, which you can see by this measure. Growth peaks in 2006. There's a crash of 2008. Recovers slightly by 2010, but not to its 2006 level of growth. 2017, again, not. And of course, we know 2020, this will be way over here. Global economic recession we will be in now. But it was 2006 that was the peak by this conventional way of measuring GDP per capita in the world. However, if we look at it using a log scale, then you can look at 1950 or perhaps 1964 and say they were the peak. And since then, there's been a slope going leftwards. Average GDP growth in the 1950s was higher than average GDP growth in the 1960s, which was higher than average GDP growth in the 1970s, which was higher than average GDP growth in the 1980s. Now, what happens every time is that we tend to look at individual events. For instance, as you're watching that little dot move, you look at 1917 and you go, oh, yes, that was the oil shock, 1973, 4, 5. And you look ahead and you go, that was a recession in 1981. You look again and you go, that's a recession in the early 90s. And you go, that's the growth of the early 2000s, but crashed by the global recession of 2008 and so on. And you're constantly talking about individual events. We will talk about the pandemic of 2020 and how that caused GDP to fall. And of course, the individual events are important. They matter. But step back and you can see that this thing is slowing down overall, because you cannot become ever more productive. It is not possible. We hit a peak of productivity in the 1950s, following a peak of innovation in the 1930s. We hit a peak of population growth in the 1960s. Things don't always go faster and faster and faster. Let's just look at China GDP, because China has one of the biggest rises in GDP in the world until recently. And you'll see for the early 2000s, it rising more each year than the year before. Slightly affected by 2008, but not greatly. Climbing to a new height of growth in 2010, and it slows down till 2015 when it rises again. And we're talking about huge increases, and then it begins to slow. And people began to worry towards the end of last year about what's happened to GDP growth in China. We can look at other things. We can look at stocks and shares. This is the NASDAQ. It's the share index in the United States, which began mainly with high-tech goods, Microsoft, Apple, these kind of things. And if you look at this, you see the value of shares in the 90s not just rising, but beginning to rise exponentially. Now, whenever anything rises exponentially, that has to stop. And it did stop shortly after 1996, as the next graph shows. And here is the next graph. The series taking a bit longer, and there's the dot-com crash. It looks like the arc of a roller coaster with a double loop, going to come round again by 2006, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then it goes up and up and up again to reach a new height, 2018, 2019. Got much higher than this actually, before of course it crashed again with the pandemic. But it was going to crash with something, wasn't it? When you look at these loops, you can see they're loops, they go round. That's not saying that you can foretell the future. You can just foretell the rough shape of the future. You can't tell when shares are going to go up and down, otherwise you can make a fortune. But you know that they can't carry on rising in value forever. Something very much more human now, and less than 10 slides to go, if you're getting sick of watching these little dots move around. This is the average height of people in the world. People by the year in which they were born. And you can see that it was rising quite steadily until 1950, and then it begins to slow down. Now, it actually falls after 1978, but that's because the mix of who's in the world changes. So, in fact, average heights are not falling in any particular country. They're rising in every country in the world, the average height of human beings. But they're not rising as fast as they were rising for your parents and grandparents. So we're getting a slowdown in ourselves, in our bodies, and changes that occurred in our bodies. It's all pointing towards a kind of increase in stability, an increase in predictability in the future. I'm just going to show you something else which was rising exponentially, at least until recently. So if you remember before, I told you the only things I've managed to find that were rising exponentially were CO2 emissions and temperatures. Well, here's the third, the number of university graduates in the world as a proportion of young people, rising most recently to around about a third of all young people going to university at some point. But you can tell that this has to stop rising. I mean, it can't go above 100%. And it would be good if it got to near 100%, but it will not rise at this 1 to 1.5% rate year after year after year. It will have to slow down. And it probably is slowing down at the moment with the pandemic. So that's the third thing that's accelerating. Most things are decelerating. Here's something which absolutely had to decelerate. It's the rate at which species are becoming extinct in the world, which peaked in 1984. We were killing more species, annihilating species in 1984 than any other time before or since. And then the rate of annihilation of species begins to fall. It didn't begin to fall because we were particularly conscientious. It began to fall because in the 1970s and 1980s, the majority of the very rare species on small islands were wiped out, and there were fewer and fewer very rare species to become extinct by more recent years. But it's a very fortunate trend. Well, still fairly disastrous. It's 70%, and these are large animals being lost by the year 2013. But if it had been faster than that, then we would be extinct as well. So I thought I'd just include that. Now, the fourth and I think final thing that was accelerating. So I'm trying to give you a sense of what's changing in the world. And here's the fourth one. The number of flights being taken in the world. Not the number of people flying. Most people in the world will never fly. Majority of people being born now in the world will never fly. Many of these flights are being taken by people who fly several times a year. But again, you can see that the graph moves in this direction. You see it moves towards the right. It's an acceleration. By the year 2017, 4 billion flights, 4,000 million were being taken a year. The number of flights was not just rising, it was rising faster and faster and faster each year. 2013, 2014, 2015, 2016, 2017, adding 300 million more flights being taken than the year before. And that went up 2018, 2019, and then it crashed. Now it'll go up again. But the number of flights in the world may not get back to the number of flights that we did have in December and January of this year. May never get back up to that level. The cost of flying may increase and be such to deter people from flying. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because flying, of course, is so polluting. It contributes to that carbon dioxide, which is accelerating, which contributes to the rise in temperature, which is still accelerating. So a few things are accelerating, but most things are not. About 5 more slides to go. So please start thinking of some questions. Back to babies again. Just to kind of give you an idea of the absolute numbers. By 1976, we were adding 110 million babies a year. By 1983, 120 million. By now, 135. And then it goes down in the 90s. Round again. Up again. And then down and down and down. Those loops are baby booms. The first baby boom happened around about here, 1950 and slightly earlier. It was the baby boom that came at the end of the Second World War. It was the baby boom that came with revolution in China. Whenever you have disruption and war, you get babies. It's the baby boom that came with partition in India. And after that baby boom, you get a slowdown. But then those babies get to the age where they can have babies, and they have the babies in the 1960s. And there's a slowdown. But then the grandchildren of those post-war baby boom babies, they have children, which is in the 80s. So the reason you get these loops are baby booms and echoes of baby booms. But by the year 2000, the echoes getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And then we get out of this and then we head that way. And that is people deciding to have no children, or to just have one child, or at most to have two, with it being very, very rare to decide to have 3 or 4 children. It's a fundamental shift that's occurred. Lots of things are settling down. Life expectancy in the world was going up most quickly in the 1960s because infant mortality was falling most quickly in the 60s. It carries on going up in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, a little acceleration in the year 2000 as we got infant mortality really low. Now it's around about 73, 74 years. These are the projections by the World Bank. I think they're a bit silly because they think it's going to do this, going to go up like this. I think it's much more likely it'll wiggle around once more and settle maybe around 80 years time. But you can certainly agree with me, or I hope you can, if you look at the pattern from 1966 onwards, that there's been a slowdown in the rise of life expectancy. Back then it was rising by almost a year, by 0.8 of a year. By the 1970s, it's rising by half a year. By the 1990s, it's rising by only a fifth of a year. Little increase again, little slow down again. We're settling towards something. We're settling towards a kind of, not an end of history at all, but something that's more predictable than we might have thought it would be. We've only got 2 more slides to go. This is a complicated one, but it's the last slide in the book. So I thought I would include it here. And it's about the change in the city of Tokyo. Tokyo is one of the biggest cities in the world. And if you remember, I showed you earlier that Japan has this slowing population. In fact, falling population. What this graph, it's spiraling around, is showing you is when was Tokyo growing in its center? When was it growing in the suburbs? 1940s, 47, it grew in the suburbs. 1947, 1950, they built up tower blocks in the center. 1955, 56, 1960, 1964, they began to suburbanize again, building in the suburbs. Then they began to build in the center again. But can you see it's moving towards this point, this 0, 0 point, point of not changing anymore. And we find this very hard to imagine, but you just have to look at the city of Tokyo, a city that's slowing down, hardly rising in population anymore, a city that is going to stabilize before London and New York stabilizes. These diagrams, they're not new. They're used in mathematics and physics. They're used in particular for understanding how a pendulum swings. So here you've got a pendulum, and it's a pendulum slowing down. And so as it slows down, the diagram has it zooming into the center, more and more and more slowly. These diagrams show you position and speed, velocity on the x-axis, position on the y-axis. It's a way of looking at change. For when change becomes more regular, when you've got really high quality data, when you can actually begin to look at it and think, this isn't an error in my data, this is real. I'll show you one more time. Goes from point 1 to point 2 to point 3, back to point 4 and to point 1 again. And those points 1, 2, 3 and 4 are also on the phase portrait diagram. You will have found this almost certainly quite difficult to follow. I decided not to tell you that at the beginning because it'll put you off, but these graphs are strange. They're weird. You won't have seen them before. But what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to show you that what used to be the case, that we were speeding up faster and faster and faster, that people were having more and more children, which was the case when I was born in 1968. The biggest increase in children ever in the world, a 2% increase that year. Bigger than ever before in the history of the species, bigger than will ever happen again. That idea of speed, that idea of change, that incredible idea of just how different our lives are to our parents and our grandparents, our lives are not quite as different to our children as they will be to our parents. This has all kinds of geographical implications. I put some of them up here on the last slide. It doesn't mean that everything is going to end. It doesn't mean that we're going to carry on living the way we are forever. It will still carry on changing, but it means that we are probably over the fastest changes that we will experience. And the changing future will be change which is less about material goods and things that produce carbon, which we have to reduce, and will be more about social changes in how we live with each other. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and I'm very happy to take any questions. And I really hope you could hear me throughout that, because I just have to trust that you could, because I couldn't see any of your faces. So thank you ever so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Dawley, and I really thank you immensely for sharing with us your keen insights on the geography of slowdown. The compelling visualizations aptly illustrated your point that indeed slowdown is upon us, and it is better if we embrace it. The floor is now open for any questions the participants might have for Professor Dawley. We'll be taking questions through the chat box. Sir, there are a few questions. May I read them out to you?
Yes.
How is population? Professor, could you explain a little bit more on how did population growth in sub-Saharan African countries become negative? Can it be attributed to the growing level of education more than the governance and policies? Or is it something else? This is the question posed by Mr. Ravi to you, sir.
Okay. Sub-Saharan Africa, when the rest of the world was decelerating in the 1980s, and population growth was still rising, but rising less quickly, that deceleration wasn't seen in Africa. And the coincidence, and there's been a paper written in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in February of last year on this. It coincided with structural adjustment, when the World Bank and the IMF said that countries in Africa had to reduce their public spending. And they reduced their public spending on schools, particularly schooling for girls. And as a result of girls leaving school earlier, because of the IMF and the World Bank, those girls tended to have an extra baby when they became young women. The result may be as many as 1 billion extra people on the planet, due in effect unwittingly to the IMF and the World Bank, not understanding what the effect of their policies would have been. This isn't a problem because world population is slowing. So we may get to 10 billion people, we may not. I don't think we're going to get to 11 billion people. But when people look at the countries of Africa and say, look how many people there are there, it's important to remember that the most important recent reason is the IMF and the World Bank making a mistake, which they now admit was a huge mistake. And also, of course, the share of world population of Africa has only recently gone back to what it was 400 years ago, because Africa was absolutely decimated by the slave trade. So in a way, we're going back to a share of world population that we saw 400 or 500 years ago. Similar with China and India. It's really interesting to look back at estimates of population 400 or 500 years ago and to see, you know, Europe needs to shrink quite a lot more, but we are heading to a more stable distribution of people.
Now, Mr. Himanshu Gandhi wants to know what are the statistical tools you have used to study these changes in population, GDP, etc.
What are the statistical tools? The main thing is getting access to the data, and the data being of very, very high quality. So if the data is not of high quality, then as soon as you look at change between 2 years, it begins to just look like a kind of random spike. So that's the main thing. The only clever statistical thing I did which makes the graphs look like they look, is I measure the rate of change, not at the point that I'm studying, but from the point just before to the point after. So if I'm looking at population change, say in the year 2019, I measure it from 2018 to 2020 and divide by 2 for 2 years. That sounds really simple, but that one innovation of measuring change from the point before to the point after in everything you do makes the patterns much easier to understand, makes them far smoother.
Thank you, sir. Sir, Dr. Rukma Chaturvedi says, very well explained, sir. Do you support slowdown of population, the one-child policy of China, and the growing population of developed nations?
I think in hindsight, the one-child population of China probably wasn't necessary. In hindsight, after, if you could have gone forward in time and looked at what was happening in the rest of the world, if the people in China had known and had decent statistics at the time, and they'd known that the average number of children in China had gone from 6 children per woman to 2 in one generation before the one-child policy, then you could have seen that it need not have been as draconian as it was. And it wasn't necessary. And China has an interesting problem in future because it's not going to have enough young people. But if I'd been in China in the 1970s and early 1980s, I probably would have supported the policy given what they knew then. Sorry, the complicated answer. Now we don't have to worry at all about population. We really don't. It is falling everywhere in the world. Falling mainly because of the choices of women. The average woman in the world wants half a child less, sounds odd, half a child less than the average man. And increasingly everywhere, the average woman in the world is getting her wish more than the average man. And men are changing also. So it's a lovely thing to see in your lifetime. People, when they feel safe, and particularly when they know their children will almost certainly survive them. The trick is getting infant mortality really, really low. A few years ago, infant mortality fell in a year worldwide by 10%, unbelievably fast. So as soon as you know that your children will almost certainly live longer than you feel safe having 1 child or 2 children. And that's the magical thing which has happened in our lifetimes.
Thank you for the expository talk, sir. So your prediction about slowdown look more and more real in a post-COVID scenario. Your comments, sir.
Yes, I finished the book. The book's called Slowdown, and I finished it in January. Didn't change anything. And it was published a few months ago in the middle of the pandemic. The pandemic does make slowdown easier to explain. And it means I get less criticism when I say I think everything is slowing down. I do include in the book information about previous pandemics. The 1918 pandemic, which world GDP fell by 14% that year, but then it rose by 16% the year after. We bounced back from that pandemic very quickly, and that's worldwide. Even India, which had the largest numbers of deaths in the world from that pandemic. The other big pandemics, fast ones, 1951, 1957, 1968, again, we bounced back quickly. However, all those pandemics, they were flu, they all came at a time when there was acceleration in population, acceleration in GDP. This pandemic has hit at a time when we were already decelerating, when economic growth was already slowing. And also at a time when we're much more aware of what's going on. So I do worry about the economic slowdown, but I think this pandemic will not be a blip like those previous ones. It could well be the turning point at which we do decide we can afford to live with a little less. We just have to make sure that people don't go hungry, but we should not expect acceleration in future.
Mr. Ravi wants to ask you, your projections on life expectancy is indicative of gloomy outcomes of the health strategies prescribed under the health segments of the SDGs. Does it mean a restructuring of the SDGs are required now?
I'm just not as optimistic as the World Bank because they could be right. But it just when you look at the curves, the idea that we're suddenly going to get life expectancy rising quite so quickly, and it's partly because the majority of the reason for rising life expectancy so far in the world has been fewer infant and child deaths. Reducing infant and child deaths has by far the biggest effect. Um, Improving life expectancy at older ages becomes harder and harder and harder to do. And so the idea that we're going to have life expectancy for the planet in the 80s and 90s, in a very short amount of time, within 20 or 30 or 40 years, I just think that's a little bit too optimistic. I could be wrong. It would be nice if I'm wrong. It's going to be great to be a planet absolutely full. Majority of people in the world will be old in the years to come. That will then settle down, and we'll head to a population pyramid which looks like that. But we are heading to a population pyramid which looks like this for places like China and so on.
Hello.
Hi there.
So Dr. V.K. Srivastava wants to ask you a question.
Go on.
Yes, Dr. Srivastava?
Yes,
Professor
hello.
Srivastava, you may ask your question. Yes, Professor,
Hello.
you may ask your question. Yes, sir, you're audible.
You're muted. You need to unmute his mic.
Yes, sir, we've unmuted him. Sir, please unmute yourself.
Hello.
Hi there.
Are you able to? Can you listen me, please?
I can hear
Yes,
you.
sir.
Hello. Well, Dr. Darling, your paper is a very well researched paper. I think you have done a lot of labor. At the first sight, within a few minutes, I could get an impression that you are a master of slowdown. But now I think you should get a delete on the concept of a slowdown and its relation to the economy. The only thing that I would like to get elaborated from you is what are the implications towards human development of all the variables that you have taken into account, and you have made a good analysis based on larger countries, smaller countries, and different regions. What implications do arise on the theme that we are discussing in this webinar, that is their impact on human development and sustainability of development? Could you please elaborate?
Thank you for that question. It's a very big question. The kind of issues that I think arise are that population falls, which we're beginning to see, are happening first in the richest countries, like Japan. They're happening in many parts of Europe. The population is falling in many parts of Spain, parts of Italy, many parts of Germany. We're actually getting fewer people. That isn't a problem unless you have rigid borders. And if you have rigid borders, so people can't come in to areas which have got houses built, which have got sewer systems built, but when the population is falling, then there is a problem. In the poorer parts of the world, the economies are on average doing better, that is still growing, compared recently to the richest. This has only been since the year 2010. Only since around about 2010 have we seen the United States, Europe, and Japan shrinking in terms of its share of global GDP, and the poor parts of the world widening. So it's very, very recent that this has occurred. it's very hard to prophesy what will happen in future. But particularly if you look at the way that this particular disease, COVID, moved around the planet, it moved between the richest countries first at the highest rates, which are most interconnected. And it slowed them down, and it revealed the weaknesses and the dependencies of the places which had the highest GDP, and how, despite the fact that places like Europe and Korea and Japan and North America may look very sophisticated, when it comes to simply providing shelter for people who need it or food for people who need it, they're not necessarily that good at doing it. I do think we're looking at a more equal world in future. However, you have to work for that, because if you don't, it doesn't just happen. If you don't keep a good eye on what is going on, I'm afraid the world's billionaires will take more and more and more. It's a separate thing. I study inequality separately. But the last thing to say on that is, when the world was growing, when the population was growing faster and faster, when GDP was going faster and faster and faster, you could tell people, just be patient. You'll get your time. One day you can be rich, you can have more. When the world is slowing, when a number of people, the size of markets, are not getting larger and larger in future, when the wealth of the world is not getting bigger and bigger, telling people to wait your time and then you too will be well off doesn't work as a message anymore. So you have to work out how to share what you have better. Japan and China are going to have to work out how to get used to the idea that younger people from other parts of the world are probably going to have to move there. Because what is the point of building an enormous city in China if the population is dropping by 30% and 30% again, and your city has already been built? So these are the really complicated stories for the rest of the world. Stability in India, population stability in India, in Bangladesh, and in Pakistan. This is so recent. It was unimagined 20 years ago. We've been used to, we have a model that assumes that everything gets bigger, because that's what it had been doing for 100 years. That if you sell Coca-Cola, you'll always make a profit because there'll be more children to buy bottles of Coca-Cola from you. Now, the basic model of making a profit by selling Coca-Cola no longer works. And the company Coca-Cola, who make Coke, know this. And they've been trying to find different things to do. And what's slightly worrying for them is that nothing is as profitable as selling Coca-Cola, but they cannot carry on making a profit selling Coca-Cola, because there are fewer children who will buy it, but also it's not very good for your teeth either. So I think we're living in interesting times. Just because things are slowing down doesn't mean that they will get better, but as long as people are aware that they could be better, I think we have a very good chance.
Oh,
Thank
well,
you, sir.
very good.
Sir.
It's very interesting that you have also brought in the question of climate change, and that is also slowing down and may solve many of the problems faced by the world today. Just one reference, if you allow me a few seconds. Dr. Darling, I had a brief stint in Oxford University Geography Department in 1972-73, when I was invited by Professor Peter Haggett to share my views on a conference on retailing. And that actually that has given me much more pleasure to listen to you from the same place and listen in such a good way, such an excellent analysis and study. I thank you very much for all the observations that you have made.
Thank you very much for your questions. Thank you.
So just two more questions, sir.
Okay.
Ms. Sonali Yadav wants to know, she wants to thank you for your insightful talk and says, the concept of sustainable development has gained some notoriety and has become a buzzword due to its multiple definitions and interpretation. What, in your opinion, is the path of sustainable development in the 21st century, apart from what you rightly mentioned, slow down? Your comments on socio-political directions in which you see the world moving.
Let me just use the example of air flights. So I showed you a graph showing that I think it was around about 4 billion air flights were taken in the most recent year, maybe slightly higher. The majority of those flights are taken by a very small number of people, including normally people like me. When the pandemic hit, I had 10 air flights cancelled. I didn't realize how much I was flying. So I am one of those small numbers of people who fly many, many, many times a year. Sustainable development depends on people like me reducing our flights dramatically, maybe just once or twice a year instead of many times a year. It depends on people like me living in just one house, not having two houses, not commuting between them, not using up unfair resources. It requires people like me not to drive cars that pollute as much. And where you are, it requires the 10% who are best off where you are to be more careful about their pollution, because the best off, the most wealthy 10% of people where you are will almost certainly cause more pollution in terms of CO2 than the majority of the rest of the population, apart from stoves, which are a separate issue. But sustainability environmentally ultimately depends on greater control and less consumption by the best of people on the planet. It requires us to buy clothes and use them until they wear out. And it primarily doesn't affect the poorest people on the planet. And doing things like this, talking by Zoom, you just, my wife just walked through the back because I'm in a corridor in my house, is where I work. It would be lovely to come and actually physically see you. But as we can see, it is entirely possible for us to do it this way. And so I didn't need to take a car to Heathrow Airport, to get a plane from Heathrow, to fly to you, to get another car, which would take me to where you are, to stay in a hotel, which would have been nice. You know, we've been forced to do this because traveling is great. But for somebody like me who gets to travel a lot, and the other people like me in the world who produce the bulk of pollution, reducing what we do is the biggest change. And then making sure that there are opportunities in the world so people don't try to fly as much as they can. Other people don't try and buy as much as they can. Don't see having a huge amount of material wealth as a sign of success. When I was at school, the good doctor was saying about, because I grew up in Oxford, so I was at nursery school when you were here in the 1970s. When I was at school in the 1980s, I was taught for my geography A level that an ice age was coming and the world was going to get cooler. And I had to say the world is going to get cooler to get my marks in geography. So it's only really been 40 years in which we've gone from thinking the world is cooling down to realizing it isn't just heating up, but it's heating up faster and faster and faster. The temperature charts yesterday for Siberia are extremely frightening. But the reason I don't want you to be upset about this is 40 years is a very short amount of time to learn this. And it does mean that we're going to have to live and behave in ways where we don't do things which damage the planet as much as we have been doing, a lot of which we really didn't quite understand until very recently. The last 10 years of global warming have been absolutely exceptional. And you might have noticed in the last 10 years, the people who don't believe in global warming have all gone quiet because it is unarguable now that the planet is warming up.
So the final question for the day. Ms. Swati Singh wants to know, if we look closely, we find that poor people are having more babies as compared to that of financially stable people. What is your opinion at this tendency and its impact?
Yes, it's interesting. Although people in Britain often suspect that richer people in Britain are having more babies because they can afford to have them, maybe 3 babies or 4. There's been many studies on this. The number of babies are coming down overall, but a poor family is more likely in India to have 3 or 4, say, and a rich family much more likely to have 1. And an aspirational family more likely to have 1, because your chance of your child doing well socially is higher if you can put all your resources into them. When I've studied countries around the world, what in terms of fertility, what I found is that the number of babies inside any country is lowest amongst the poor where there is the greatest equality. So if you have a high degree of inequality in a country, poorer people will have more babies for all kinds of reasons. One is it's a way to show success. It creates laborers who can work with you and somebody to look after you when you're old as well. In India, I think I may be wrong, but I think in India, it may still be Kerala, which has the lowest number of babies being born. You can tell me if I've got this wrong, years ago. And Kerala is one of the more equal states in India. But you see the same thing everywhere else around the world. In Europe, one of the lowest rates of having babies is in Finland. And in Finland is the most equitable country in Europe. 2 years ago, Finland had the lowest infant mortality rate in the world. In the whole of Finland, which is a country of 5-6 million people, only 97 babies died in 1 year. Less than 100 babies died in the entire country. When things get like that, it has an enormous effect on the number of children that people have, because we have to remember how fast this has changed. My grandparents were born, 2 of my grandparents, when Queen Victoria was alive, just. And they were children at a time when 1 in 10 of the children of the richest servant-keeping classes in England died before the age of 5. So we've gone in 100 years from your children may well die before they become adults to your children will almost certainly be okay. And this utterly changes everything, and it's really, really good news. And thank you again ever so much for letting me speak. Lovely way to start a Monday for me.
I'm sure that many of the participants would have liked to ask more questions, but due to the paucity of time, we won't be able to take any more questions. Despite his ardent desire, Professor Darling won't be able to stay with us any further, as he has prior commitments which he has to honor. I would now like to request Dr. A.C. Scott to thank Professor Darling and to also introduce the theme for the plenary session of day 1, which has been perfectly set up by the keynote address, the geography of slowdown and regional disparity. Over to you, ma'am.
Hello, am I audible?
Hello.
Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
So, I extend.
Hello.
Hello, Anupma, can you hear?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. You're audible.
So, I'm really grateful
Hello? Hello, ma'am? Ma'am, please unmute yourself.
Is it okay?
Yes, ma'am.
So I'm really thankful to Dr. Darling that he has brought out the theme of geography of slowdown beautifully. And this is something to be noted down and something to be thought over again and again. So once again, thank you, sir. And here I would like to introduce the next session, that is plenary 1. And the topic of the plenary 1 is geography of slowdown and regional disparity. And all over the world, especially in India, we see that the entire region is so disparate. And right from north to the south, if we go, we will find that the geography spatially is really different. So this session will be carried on this topic. And I would invite Dr. Sarika Shukla to please introduce Dr. V.K. Srivastava, the speaker of the plenary session.
Hello, Dr. Shukla? Hello? Hello, Dr. Shukla?
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Welcome to the plenary session 1. We have a great, very engaging session planned for today. In the next 1.5 hours, our eminent speakers will take stage to discuss on topics ranging from human development to sustainability to COVID impact on economy. It's my pleasure to introduce first speaker of the plenary session 1, Dr. V.K. Srivastava, former chairman, International Geographical Union Commission, and former head, Department of Geography, Deen Dayal Upadhyay University of Gorakhpur. He has guided 35 PhD researchers. Approximately 75 research papers have been published in international and national journals by him. Sir is a recipient of Commonwealth Fellowship and Fulbright Scholarship. He has completed a range of UGC, DST, and ICSSR projects. We welcome you, sir. The floor is yours.
Hello.
Yes, sir.
Hello. Can you listen me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Hello.
Yes, sir.
Hello. Okay.
Yes, sir. You are audible, sir.
Okay. Thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to participate in the International E-Conference on Borderless Growth, Equality and Sustainable Development, the Pathway to Human Welfare, organized by the Geography Awareness Forum of Geography Department of the prestigious IT College of Lucknow. It's my pleasure to share my views, and my views are based on general experience and observations rather than on deep research. May I speak on the theme, the subcontinent India, a borderless world and human development. Friends, it is my pleasure, great pleasure and privilege to share my views on the current theme, borderless growth, equality and sustainable development with an apprehension for human development. The axiom of borderless may be borderless world or borderless growth. The seemingly sensitivity rests on the assumption that economic growth will mechanically lead to greater well-being for all. This hypothesis presumes that open borders would result in an increase of 67 to 147% growth across the world. The growth of world gross product, which will lead to economic growth. And this economic growth will result in greater human well-being. Now, the developing world has changed. Its values, knowledge, socio-economic control, strives for equality are at par with the developed world. A borderless world would facilitate people to move freely over the continents. One cannot isolate oneself from the world. Therefore, the term borderless may be a reality and more so an issue for discussion and debate like the one we are having today. The line of thought may have motivated the Geography Awareness Forum of this institution to provide a platform like the one we are associated with today. To have a wide-ranging discussion on the theme, it is most welcome. My vision of a borderless world, I'm not an expert on borderless concept, but my vision is that in ancient times, the borderless geographic unit of the Indian subcontinent was much more extended to the north, northwest, east, and southeast. Himalayas, as you know all, to the north, bordering the Tibetan Plateau, beyond Nepal and Bhutan. To the west lay Trans-India, now known as Afghanistan and Pakistan, the Hindu Kush Mountains, the Arakan chain to the east. The eastern states includes Bangladesh, Myanmar, and Indonesia. Free movement of scholars, traders, businessmen, citizens, and public servants strengthened the political and cultural relations, and it was a normal phenomenon. Cultural aspects dominated over political aspirations in this area. The exchange of ideas, culture, seminal visions of human welfare are exhibited in the journeys of great travelers, thoughts of the then philosophers, and chronicles of history well known to the humankind. Humanity, compassion, and benevolence overruled political borders. Lifestyles promoted harmony with nature. The society was governed by universal moral order, signifying a natural, religious, and moral order. The resulting geography was a sustainable and peaceful society in a borderless world of the Indian subcontinent then. The vision of this all-encompassing and unbroken space relationship of the Indian subcontinent is what I mean by the term borderless world, and which I will elaborate further. Then coming to the axiom that a borderless world will promote economic growth, leading to equality, and which in its turn creates sustainable development and formulates a blueprint for pathways to human development. It is not so in reality. Economic growth alone, as such, is only a subset of human development paradigm, and it has its own limitations. That is what I feel. Taking human development into account, it is about expanding the richness of human life rather than simply the richness of the economy in which human beings live. It is an approach focused on people and their opportunities and choices. Thus, three critical issues may be accounted for human development in this context. These are to lead a long and healthy life. Number two, to be educated. Number three, to enjoy a decent standard of living. Then there are additional choices also that include human rights, political freedom, and self-respect. Now, the basic issue of human development thus is to create an enabling environment for people to enjoy long, healthy, and creative lives. Human development is also about expanding the richness of human life rather than simply the richness of the economy. It is significant because the concept of growth is limited to a linear curve of growth of money. We are supposed to be dealing with not only economic development, but human development and sustainability of human development, providing pathways for human welfare, which is more important. Our concern is special, dealing with human activities in space and the resultant spatial organization that may or may not be conducive to human welfare in general. Coming to the question of sustainable development, the issue of man-environment symbiosis may be taken. The emphasis on sustainability depends on man-environment symbiosis. In this relationship, the two variables, that is man and environment, not only depend mutually, but also the dependency is mutually beneficial. It is the relationship between Mother Nature and the human's place within the nature. It is thus a mother and son relationship. The mother feeds the son and the son grows. In turn, the son's actions are expected to be positive towards the mother. The positive relationship leads to sustainable human development. If relationship is negative, it will be harmful to the nature and to man both. It is here that the question of sustainability of human development lies. The basis is perception of natural resources that one has. You will remember what Gandhiji said about natural resources. He said, nature has enough to meet the human needs, but not the human greed. It means that overutilization of natural resources may have degenerative impact on man and environment both. Thus, if one considers the bounty of nature for unlimited consumption, leading to generation of more wealth, it will lead to inequality between nature and man. The more the use, the more will be deterioration of the environment, posing threat to human life. The learned colleagues will be knowing that man-environment relationship is best perceived in the Vedas. You may remember that Rig Veda, the first of the four Vedas, contains prayers addressed to sun, fire, water, sky, and air, the five basic elements which are invoked as deities. These are the five basic elements of the environment as known to all. The banyan tree is blessed by God, and no disease can stay where this tree is present. Vedas also mention, as you may be knowing, that air, water, and plants permeate the universe and are essential for the existence of life. And by life, I mean bios, the living world on the earth. When the utilization of natural resources leads to damaging the nature, it results in lowering the natural characteristics of environment, with environment and further leading to consequential negative impact on quality of human life, with which we are more concerned in this theme. It may create unsustainability of man-environment relationship and may lead to degeneration of both. You may remember that the erstwhile industrial belt of Western Europe deteriorated due to a blind race for development. Industrial activity declined in the West European industrial wealth due to excessive use of resources. The working population of the region migrated to other areas in search of jobs, leaving behind the older generation to suffer. The industrial activities polluted the soils of Western Europe to the extent that not even a leaf of grass would grow there. I had the privilege of being part of a group organized by the International Geographical Union to study the condition of the then industrial belt of Western Europe. And I have observed with my own eyes that to what extent over industrialization, overuse of natural resources will have an impact on the welfare of human beings, on the development of economy. The imbalance between resource consumption and resource regeneration is more important. Like humans, nature also needs to be respected and nurtured. And it is here that the question of sustainability, the question of human development lies. Coming to the question of borderless development, it probably, to my mind, aims that a borderless growth will lead to equality and sustainable development, resulting ultimately in human development. This may be the hidden hypothesis. Hypotheses are always hidden. The concept of borderless growth is probably related to the growth of the economy of a region or a country or of the world in general, with free movement of money, material, matter, and man. And by man, I mean labor force. It presumes a borderless 24-hour information economy, which to my mind is not conducive to human development, more so contrary to the axiom of sustainable development we are supposed to focus on. The borderless concept seems to have its roots in digital economy, to my mind. It means we are moving away from the natural and human resources of society. It also seemingly negates the role of manpower in running the economy to a large extent. It is also said that digital economy creates jobs, opportunities, and economic growth. The question is, job opportunities for whom? For those having requisite training and ability, not for all job seekers. Not all job seekers can be or having digital expertise. Much larger part of the job seekers constitutes rural illiterate persons who may be illiterate, lack digital expertise. A larger proportion of job markets in the developing world thrive on input of human labor and human wisdom rather than digital expertise and artificial intelligence. The borderless growth will then exclude a larger chunk of working population without any alternative means for earning a living. That is my proposition. Friends, we are debating the theme with a concern for human development. The digital techniques do have significance for spatial evaluation. They have great utility in presenting the digital maps, digital image of natural resources with accuracy. They help in spatial analysis too. But so far as man is concerned, the human being is a complex store of digital character of its own and may not be digitally equipped. Thus, the concept of borderless development, to my mind, has its own merits and limitations when spatial characteristics are confronted with. One is expected to evaluate the dimensions of spatial distribution of resources and prospects for production and consumption. the contemporary significance of a borderless outlook. Friends, my digital expertise has severe limitations, and I accept my inability to appreciate and evaluate the digital revolution that is shaping and challenging the contemporary channels of learning. The digital world is defining and executing its aura, I think, to overpower human thought process and human intelligence, it seems. One gets the impression that the undercurrent of borderless character of economy is dominating and attracting attention to overpower the conventional mode of labor force to generate joblessness. I am not an opponent of the terminology of borderless. There is a saying, don't limit yourself, be borderless. Don't limit yourself, be borderless. This is a saying. In fact, nothing is borderless on the surface of the earth. So how can we propose or suppose a borderless world? This is my question. The earth has its own domain in the universe. We all know. There are continents and ocean bases. They have boundaries. The continents have borders demarcated by natural features like the seas, mountains, plateaus, plains, lakes, forests, and rivers, etc. The oceans divide various parts of the earth called continents and also connect them. Rivers are God gifted to both. They unite the regions and they divide the regions into various segments. River basins are geographical units endowed with ecology that reflects natural development. When river basins are utilized for meeting human needs, their potential and promises are exposed. These are like mothers who have nurtured human civilization over the centuries. When I submit before you that nothing is borderless on the earth, I mean there is a continuity among the features of the earth which unites and separates both. Political borders become diminutive, but there are two types of borders, natural and man-made. It is the latter, that is the man-made, with which I am more concerned. Natural borders are adaptable to human interaction to the extent that there is mutual control on sustainability of nature and quality of the interactive elements involved are superimposed. It is the man-made phenomena that matters in global and regional context. Apart from natural borders like plains, plateaus, and mountains, deserts, and fertile plains, forests, there are river basins as well. River basins constitute geographical units having their own personality. Their persona makes them a region, an ecological unit with the capacity of integrating man-environment symbiosis. A country may be divided into river basins to avoid political units and may be manipulated as a region for planning human activities, which is more important from geographical point of view. I remember, friends, that in the early 70s of the 20th century, the Indian National Science Academy, that is INSA we call it, from New Delhi, seriously considered the role of river valley projects in national planning. River basins are over and above political borders and are governed by man-environment symbiosis. The concept provided freedom from artificial borders drawn by man. So if one prefers the borderless world, it may be river basins. River basins have been the cradle of human civilizations since ages, as we all know. They do not need any documentary proof of their ability to unite nature and man in a symbiotic manner, leading to human development, which is the theme of this seminar. Man-made borders dominate the global scenario of environment and human development. That is the question before us. The latter is measured for centuries for countries blessed by borders carved out by man, irrespective of natural features. The Red Cliff Line and the other borders were carved out by man, human phenomena. No relation with nature, no relation with man, only political consideration. For example, there were two parts of Pakistan, East and West, when India gained freedom from the British rule. These borders are still haunting the politics of the subcontinent. In addition to international borders, there are intranational borders also. There are states or provinces within a country. Such borders play a great role in the process of human development, both this way and that way. It is known that India is the home of most ancient and continuous civilizations of the world, as said above. The first civilizations of the world developed and flourished in the Indian subcontinent due to excellence of man-symbiosis. The history of India includes the prehistoric settlements and societies in the Indian subcontinent, the blending of the Indus Valley civilization and Indo-Aryan culture into Vedic civilization. The first civilizations that took shape on the earth are credited to river valleys of the Indian subcontinent. These civilizations had risen to the glory of human achievements and deteriorated when nature-man symbiosis was neglected by man. Thus, river valley borders were endowed with nurturing civilizations, affirming that the basin borders have the power and fervor to provide opportunity to men to flourish to the extent of man-environment symbiosis, which endorses human endeavors to feed upon natural resources. India's culture is called the mother of all cultures. It is said that the fabric of Indian culture is woven with customs, tradition, spirituality, religion, yoga, joint family system, plural society, and democracy underline India's cultural heritage. Man-environment symbiosis has thus been the key to the rise of civilizations. The Indus Valley civilization, which spread and flourished in the northwestern part of the Indian subcontinent from 3300 to 1300 BC, was the first major civilization in South Asia. It was a symbol of harmonious and peaceful coexistence of man and nature. In addition to river valley civilizations, India has demonstrated the existence and sustenance of forest culture, that is Aranya Sanskriti. The forest culture is still rooted in the soils in spite of attempts of the erstwhile British rule to obliterate the tribes on the lines of America. The tribal areas are like institutes where lessons for agri-management, forest management, wildlife management, climate control are available free of charge, and they open the gates for human development. Now, coming to pathway for human development, our concern for sustainable development in context of growth and equality is underlined with the sustainability of 4 distinct areas of human, social, economic, and environmental sustainability leading to human well-being. Gandhiji's basic aim was to have an all-round development of the society that included human development along with socio-economic and political development. Gandhian program is holistic and multidimensional. The objective of his constructive work is the creation of a non-violent society with implications for universal peace. And to my mind, a creation of non-violent society with a consideration for universal peace may provide many solutions to the problems that we are dealing with, the growth, the digital growth of economy and its implications for human development. Thank you very much. Thank you. Hello, can you listen me? Hello.
Yes, Sarika,
Thank you.
unmute yourself.
Thank you.
Hello.
Thank you very much, sir. Dr. Shukla, would you like to take over for the question and answer session?
First, I would like to thank Sir for his insightful session. We were delved into a borderless world of the Indian subcontinent. Thank you, Sir, for sharing your vision on the borderless world. You rightly said we can't isolate ourselves from the world. Open borders will result in exponential growth globally. We now open the floor for questions. We have 1 or 2 minutes to take up questions. Kindly leave your questions in the chat box. We will move to the next session of the day. Now I will request Scott ma'am to introduce the second speaker of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. And thank you, Sarika, for giving the second one. The next plenary speaker we have for the day is Dr. Pandey, Professor Pandey from Delhi University, and he's from the School of Economics. So I welcome you, sir, on this platform. And I'm so grateful that you have joined and you have agreed to speak on the theme. Dr. Pandey holds important administrative positions in the department also, geography department, and in the Delhi University also. And he has supervised 7 PhD theses and 10 MPhil theses. He has authored many books, 26 research papers in peer-reviewed journals, 36 research papers published in the proceedings of the conferences, and he has research projects also. He has successfully completed with the international collaborations with different countries. And he is a recipient of many awards, and he is a member of important geographical bodies, to name NAGI, IGU, IIG, and many others, the international ones also. So, sir, I welcome you, Dr. Pandey, and I request you to kindly speak on the theme. Over to Dr. Pandey. Dr. Pandey, can you hear us?
Could you?
Okay, thank
yes,
you so much.
yes, yes.
And also please allow to share the screen.
Okay, sir. Yes, I'll just check.
Yeah. Thank you. Respected professor and my teacher, my guru, Professor V.K. Srivastava Sahab ko sadar namaskar, pranam.
Good luck. Thank you.
And Madam Shukla and the host of this conference. I've seen so many names. Do like to at least a few things, one or two very important, which I had. And a special thank to Dr. Alpana, who contacted me. And all of a sudden, this meeting was fixed in the evening while I was in another conference, because you have taken the name of Professor R.B. Singh as my supervisor, my guru, so I could not say no. And it still, because I belong to Uttar Pradesh, Varanasi, Kanpur, Lucknow, they're my hometown. So, and I have good friends in the IT college. And so it was emotional bonding. I cannot say no. So I do like to speak. May I know, how much time do I have so that I can plan accordingly?
Sir, you have around 30 minutes, sir.
Okay, good. Enough. Wonderful. So, according to the topic, I was listening, Professor V.K. Srivastava Sahab, sir was telling about this river boundary, all that. And he's a stalwart, a very famous, eminent geographer, president of Nagi. And fortunately, is my guru also, my teacher also. So while working during my PhD and the Indo-Canadian project, I gradually moved my research on the highland. And today, I'd like to present the borderless growth, equality, and sustainable development between highland and lowland societies of India. So highland, lowland societies, no doubt, they are geographically located separately from each other. There is a complete isolation from one region to other region. But if you see, there is such a unique bonding relationship between the highland and the lowland. This bonding we can see in our economy, in our society, rituals, cultures, and overall, the overall Indology, Indian philosophy, Indian livelihood, Indian spiritual culture, all these are very largely depends on the highland lowland interaction. And in this regard of the highland lowland interaction, and you can see very clearly that without highland lowland interaction, none of the societies either of highland or lowland can survive. For the sustainable development, this highland lowland interaction is very, very important. And for this, first of all, I'd like to discuss the highland. And for highland, I'd like to show this Google image. You can understand through this image, this Himalaya, and I refer particularly the Indian Himalaya. Friends, this is the third largest glacial region of the world after South Pole, that is called Antarctica Pole, then Arctic Pole, and then this is the third pole. This is the reason that Himalayas designated as third pole of the world. In the meeting of the Montreal Convention 2012, the term third pole was discussed greatly in the meeting of the cryosphere. So this is one of the largest cryosphere of the world in Indian Himalaya. And With this third largest glacial region of the world, this is the source of the number of human civilization in the plain areas, and the highest water tower in the world. These glacial areas feed millions of the rivers, and as per the NASA record of the satellite image in 1996, in 1996 there were 15,000 glaciers on the Himalaya, and more or less there are 15,000 headwater regions. So those headwaters region finally move and form a river system. And you can see the geographical expansion, geographical extent of the glaciated areas of the third pole. And this third pole gives origin of these several human civilization. It may be Indus Valley civilization, it may be Sardaria, Amudarya civilization, maybe Wangho civilization, maybe Tarim Basin civilization, maybe Irrawaddy civilization, Chindwin, all these civilizations surviving because of the water from the highest water tower, water from the third pole, water from the Himalaya, and water of the highland sustaining the culture, society, economy, livelihood of the lowland. Friends, we cannot understand the existence of the culture like Varanasi, Kasi, Trivedi, Allahabad, Sangam, Kolkata, Patna, all these cities of the Gangetic Plain. Similarly, the Indus Valley civilization. All these low-lying areas are surviving, had survived, surviving, will survive on the resources of the highland. There is no border. So if there could have been border, these civilization could not have been developed. So without border, the water draining out and sustaining dozen of the civilization, and they, because of this highland resources of the soil and water had made the affluent plain in the lowland. Now, being a geographer, everyone, all of us, we understand that the great northern plains of India, Indo-Brahma plain, Indo-Satluj plain, this great northern plain of India is all product of the highland. The water, the soil of the highland becomes Bhabar, Tarai, Bangar, Khadar of the lowland. In the absence of the highland, there is no geographical significance. Friends, water and soil of the highland, creating a series of the geomorphic phenomena, and had developed an affluent plain. Affluent plain is a kind of plain which is highly humid, having very high drainage density. And you can see the Indo-Brahma plain, the drainage density is even more than 1 river per square kilometer. If you cross by road in the lower Ganga plain, middle Ganga plain, upper Ganga plain, or Brahmaputra plain, before crossing 1 kilometer, you can find a bridge. That shows the high drainage density plain. And this is one of the highest high drainage density plain in the world because of the highland. So this highland gives fertile soil in the lowland. In the fertile soil of the lowland. Then okay, there was some interruption. Then you can see the Himalayan highland is audible.
Yes, we can listen you.
Is it audible?
Yes, sir.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you, sir.
Yes, sir,
Yes.
you're audible, sir.
Thank
To
you.
me at least, yes.
Yeah, thank you, sir. So this highland and lowland you can find because of the water drainage. You can compare these drainage basins, all these drainage basins covering the different centrifugal pattern of the river draining out from the Himalaya, and this has sustained exactly 51% of the human population of the world. Therefore, Himalaya is also called as human equator. This 51% of the human population surviving in the plain region. 51% of the world population living in the plain, in the lowland, surviving because of the fresh water of the highland. And ultimately, this highland, lowland interaction of the Himalaya and the surrounding plains is developed a concept of the third pole. So Himalayas are also known as third pole of the world, and it is because of the human population it is called as human equator. Himalayas are human equator, equally divides the half of the world population surviving due to the fresh water of the Himalayas only. It is human equator, and from the highland lowland interaction, what are the important parameters? What are the important components which are defining, establishing the relationship between the highland and lowland? It is relief and physiography, highland in the mountain, lowland in the plain, highland, lowland controlled by drainage and geohydrology. Drainage, geohydrology are the symbol of economic development, societal interaction, social development, cultural development, spiritual development, and we know that our worship can't be complete without the holy water of the Ganga. It comes from the highland, people living in the lowland. So how the culturally, emotionally, economically, socially, highland, lowland people are bonding. Then vegetation and the environment.
Sir, you're not audible.
Also, pardon? Also, the geographical basis of the federalism. Different geographical names. Different geographical names which emerged on the basis of highland and lowland. And you know, the Uttar Pradesh was divided, lowland as Uttar Pradesh, highland as Uttarakhand. There are geographical basis of the federalism. Himalayan passes provide a number of geopolitics, not only within the country, also with international borders. Geopolitics with the Himalaya. And you know, over the last 15 days, all channels have only discussing about Indo-China border, right from Doklam to Golan. Then highland-lowland interaction, having very strong relationship between population and society. It could be economic, it could be social, it could be religious. Economically, I would like to say, economically, all the horticultures of the Western Himalaya, all the viticulture of the Eastern Himalaya, right from saffron, apple state to tea garden, tea state, all these resources are lying on the highland. But these resources are managed, controlled by the lowland. The largest producer of apple is Himachal Pradesh, Jammu Kashmir. But the largest market, largest apple mandi market lies in Delhi, Azadpur. So this is one of the best example of the highland-lowland interaction. And then cultural and tourism potential. Friends, people of the plain move to the mountain as a tourist. So there is very strong highland-lowland interaction as a form of tourism. It could be economic tourism, it could be religious tourism. Char Dham, Badrinath, Kedarnath, Gangotri, Jamnotri. You know the Nanda Devi, Jwala Devi, Chintapuni, and coming to the Mata Vaishno Devi, Amarnath. So all these religious relationship with the mountain. And apart from that, the potential economic tourism, leisure tourism. And let me tell you that it is the mountain ecosystem, which is so rich ecosystem, which contains, apart from the mountain ecosystem, it contains forest ecosystem, it contains urban ecosystem, it contains desert ecosystem, it contains coastal ecosystem. So all kinds of lowland ecosystem are already exist on the highland ecosystem. A great symbiosis between the two. Then you have energy and power potential. As you know, each and every hydropower project lies on the Himalaya, and it's all the way cutting to the plain region, serving to the plain region, and a large number of animal husbandry, the kind of trans-nomads people who carry large number of sheep and goats and all the way take to the plain region. In the plain region, these are ultimate source of the supply of the foods and nutritions in the plain region. And people of the plain move to the mountain, and all kinds of economic control, economic development in the highland, in the lowland, done by beyond the border, without border between the highland and lowland. And this way, the highland, lowland development of economy and society takes place. See the mass of the people, influx of the tourism in Himalaya And all this tourism development gives a lot of economic base to the highland. And though there are lot of risk on the highland, those risks sometimes become fatal. Hazard prone areas in the mountain where there is a number of casualties take place. But important thing is that apart from all these casualties, there are people who are going on the mountain, and you can see from this slide I have taken the picture in 2013 coming down from Rohtang Pass to Manali. There was a landslide and there was a traffic jam, and you can see there is no place on the road. Everywhere you look, all the cars are piled up one by one. You can see the number of cars you can't count. This is a kind of highland lowland interaction, people from the lowland going to the highland. And the line is going on. This was around 21-kilometer long traffic struck on the way to Manali. This is the strong bounding of the highland and lowland, the ecotourism, the assets of the mountain. And third point, I'd like to mention the social point. I do like to ask the participants, anyone can recognize this tree? What kind of tree is this? Which species is this? Those who have been on the mountain can identify. Those who have not been on the mountain, they can't identify. What kind of tree is this? Can anyone tell me? This is not a tree. This is a person, a man, carrying fodder for his animals at home. And see, पेड़ जूता बना हुआ है, इसके पैर में जूता है. It's not a tree, it's a fodder. And this kind of life is very common on the mountain for the local livelihood. And friends, this is the point I would like to highlight, that this kind of life, this hard life of this local people had changed because of interaction, borderless interaction between the highland and lowland. Because of now they have got the market, now that they are growing commercial crops on the mountain, and their livelihood had become easy. Though there are, with the developmental works, there are a lot of negative impact on the mountain by the lowland people, and now both the highland and lowland people are now renaturalizing, re-strengthening the mountain ecosystem by developing the land, water, soil, and forest. And there is large scale local participation, local community participation, and lot of awareness. So the mountain is not only a structure of the rock and garden, rather highland having divine resources which feed the population of the lowland, and the highland lowland interaction is a bonding interaction and gives a very strong societal, economic, environmental interrelationship between the highland and the lowland. I'd like to conclude. So thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Pandey, for such an insight giving on the Himalayan ecology. And especially showing the glaciers was really marvelous. To conclude this entire plenary session, before this, I would like to invite Jane to conduct the question answer session if there is any question.
Yeah.
Jane, can you hear me?
That will be nice.
Jane, can you hear me? Hello, Jane, can you hear me?
Jane, please unmute yourself. Hello, Jane.
Hello, yes, ma'am. I was not able
Yes,
to
ma'am.
unmute myself. Thank you very much, sir, for such an informative talk. I'm sure it must have been benefited everyone. Now, if there's anyone who wants to ask questions, you can drop in your question in the chat box and I will read it for sir. If anybody wants to ask any question.
Not only question, even can be
Hello?
observation. Yes.
Or if you want to say something.
Hello? Hello, sir.
Yes, Anupama ji, boliye.
Yes, sir. Sir, it was a very good session, sir. Very expository. Sir, two images really struck. One was of the serpentine line of the cars at the time of the after the landslide, and the other of the tree which you had shown, which was actually.
Yeah, this was actually, people get confused. It looks like a tree, but it's not a tree. It is a person in the form of the animals.
Hello?
Yes.
Yes, sir. I got disconnected. Yes, sir.
Yeah. It is not a tree. It is a man carrying the fodder for the animal at the home. So it's lying along the road. So it looks like a tree standing along the road, but it's the person carrying the fodder from the forest. So this is the local livelihood is very common on the mountain, and there's a lot of changes on the mountain because of the lowland people. So I thank you, the organizer, for such a wonderful topic of the borderless.
One more. Sir,
Yeah.
one more. Dr. Srivastava. Anupma, unmute Dr. Srivastava, Professor Srivastava.
Sir, ma'am, I have done. Sir has to unmute now. Sir, please unmute, sir. Srivastava, sir, please
Hello.
unmute yourself, sir.
Yes,
Yes.
we.
Yes. Hello. Hello.
Sir.
Let me take an opportunity of congratulating Vindhyavasini Pandey for the excellent paper related to the theme. And you have excelled in your presentation. But
Sir.
one thing I would like to point out, you have
Sir.
mentioned 9 ecosystem services. 9 ecosystem services operating in the region that you have studied.
Yeah.
I would suggest you to introduce the 10th service, that is the existence of exchange systems in these areas.
Okay, sir.
Without exchange systems, the man
Yeah.
and the environment will not be able to. And I congratulate you for keeping the spirit of a good presentation and very excellent organization and material of the paper. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank
Okay,
you,
sir, there is one
so
more
nice
question.
of you, sir.
Sir,
And
there is one
very
more
nice
question.
to see you, sir.
Shalini
Yes.
Singh wants to ask you, sir. Thank you, sir,
Yeah.
for such an insightful session. What is your opinion on hydroelectric power projects going in Himalayan regions? Are those environmentally feasible? What are the other alternatives?
Yeah. The Himalayan hydropower projects, though there are lot of environmental concern, but as we know, we also need power, electricity, and without power, without electricity, we cannot give a good quality of life our human population. No doubt, earlier there were destruction of the mountain region for the construction of the hydropower. After the 1986, the impact, the EIA, environmental impact assessment. So now, fortunately, we do have environmental impact assessment, and any new project cannot be developed without environmental impact assessment. So with the help of environmental impact assessment, new projects having least negative impact and maximum positive impact. Therefore now, if you see the recent hydropowers, they are being small, the meso level, macro level, the hydropower. Yes, ma'am.
I would like to add to this. When we went to Gangotri, we visited Tehri. And if anyone has gone there, it was such a beautiful area, and now it has converted into a very depressive lake. You know, you won't find a single bird over there. You won't find any air over there, and it was really a depression of atmosphere there. So and there are rest houses on the lake bed. And now we could see the top of the Tehri, this village also, the top of the temple of the village, and there were certain buildings which could be visible now on the lake bed, on the surface of the lake. So, and it was so important that it took more than 25 years to be implemented and to reach to this position. So definitely it is important, and definitely there are environmental issues. There will be, as geographers, we admit this, that there will be environmental issues. But at times, that's only, we cannot be boundless, and at times we have to be boundless. So we have to find out one rational way out of it, which leads to human welfare. So this is just one addition to it, to the answer.
Thank you. Yeah.
Very nice. Sir, want to say, sir? Ji, sir.
Now, may I remind you your own experience of working in the highland areas of Nepal and on the exchange systems.
Yes, I remember sir was with me in my field survey, and we both went up, and after that nothing was visible, and we thought, when we ventured out, me and sir, we thought that we not reach there. But when I reached on top of the mountain, I saw one full settlement the other side. And there was such a beautiful view of the shift of the settlement. So I'm really reminded with this topic of highland, relationship of highland and lowland, sir. Dr. Pandey.
Yes.
And thank you, sir, for reminding my PhD. I had already forgotten it. So many things are there, sir. And that glacier was really very beautiful. You know that I have worked on the glaciers. So Dr. Pandey, really, when I saw you, I was so happy to see one face that is really, jisko jante hain. So thank you, sir. Thank you, Srivastava sir, for bringing out that everything cannot be boundless and borderless in this plenary session. We have come to know. And there are certain things that which should be borderless and certain things which needs to be bounded in the boundaries. So, and it's so well connected with the second lecture of Dr. Pandey, that from highland to lowland, if there is no boundary, it will be very, very tough. So things should be with boundary, but then all things come from the source of boundless. This is what I think, and this is the concept which we are trying to float. And human welfare should be the emotion and the intellect of human welfare should not be boundless and borderless, because ultimately we all are aligning and working towards the human welfare, and the definition of geography has evolved to reach to the surface of human welfare. So thank you, Srivastava sir, and thank you, Pandey sir, for being with us and making this session such an enlightened one. Thank you once again, both of you. And now the next will be our paper presentation session, but we will have a break for 5 to 10 minutes. I hope, Anupma, how much time we have? 5 minutes.
We do have, no ma'am, we do have, we begin at 5:15, ma'am. We do have time.
Okay, so we have time. My request to the paper presenters is that as we log out and again we log in, please connect fast so that the paper presenters reach on the Zoom platform. So I hope everybody must have listened to this. Thank you for everything. Srivastava sir, Pandey sir. I am reminded of so many.
Thank you, sir. Srivastava sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Congratulations for a very good presentation. Keep it up.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. So nice to see you, sir.